On April 30th, 1945, at precisely 3:30 p.m., a single gunshot echoed through the concrete walls of an underground bunker in Berlin. The man who had plunged the world into its deadliest conflict lay dead by his own hand, his blood pooling on a sofa as Soviet shells pounded the city above. In the 24 hours before that moment, Adolf Hitler married, wrote his final hateful words, poisoned his beloved dog, and orchestrated his own carefully planned death. These weren't just the final hours of a dictator, they were the death throes of the Third Reich itself. Today, we take you inside the claustrophobic confines of the Führerbunker for Hitler's final day on Earth, a day filled with paranoia, betrayal, cyanide, and the desperate actions of a man who knew his 1,000-year Reich had lasted barely a decade. Welcome to the infamous past, where we will uncover the last 24 hours of Adolf Hitler. A concrete fortress. By April 29, 1945, Berlin was a city under siege. Soviet forces had encircled the German capital and were fighting their way toward the center, block by block, building by building. The once mighty Nazi war machine had been reduced to old men and Hitler Youth teenagers desperately trying to hold back the Red Army's advance. 50 feet beneath the Reich Chancellery Garden, Adolf Hitler had retreated to the Führerbunker, a concrete fortress of 18 small rooms where the air was stale, the lighting was harsh, and the constant thrum of generators barely masked the sound of Russian artillery above. This underground complex had become both Hitler's command center and his tomb. In these final 24 hours, we witnessed the complete psychological collapse of the man who had once held Europe in his grip. We'll see how his actions in these final hours revealed the true nature of his character, and how the decisions made in this concrete bunker would impact the world for decades to come. The wedding. Our story begins at midnight on April 29th, 1945. In the map room of the bunker, a strange ceremony was taking place. Hitler, dressed in his usual uniform with the Iron Cross pinned to his chest, stood behind Eva Braun, his longtime mistress. After 14 years together, they were finally getting married. The ceremony was brief and surreal. Walter Wagner, a trembling civil magistrate who had been summoned from the front lines, asked the couple if they were of pure Aryan descent and free of hereditary diseases. Both answered yes, though historians now believe Hitler may have been concealing at least 2 forms of genital abnormality. Witnesses to this macabre wedding included Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, and Martin Bormann, his private secretary. The bride signed the marriage certificate Eva B., then crossed it out and wrote Eva Hitler with apparent pride. She would carry this name for less than 40 hours. After the ceremony, a small reception was held. Hitler, who rarely drank alcohol, took a small glass of Hungarian wine sweetened with sugar. Eva sipped champagne. The mood was somber. This was no celebration, but a prelude to death. Traudl Junge, Hitler's personal secretary who would survive to tell the tale, later recalled, "The wedding was an emotional experience for Hitler, but he told me that for him, death would be a personal redemption for his many worries and what had been a very difficult life." While the newlyweds and their inner circle gathered for this strange ceremony, Berlin burned above them. That very night, Soviet forces had reached the Potsdamer Platz, just 1 kilometer from the bunker. The sound of artillery fire provided a constant backdrop to the wedding festivities, a death knell for both the couple and the regime they had built. The Testament. Shortly after the wedding ceremony, at approximately 4 a.m., Hitler summoned Trudel Junge to take dictation. The time had come to draft his final political statement and personal will, documents that would reveal the disturbing reality that Hitler remained unrepentant to the end. In the cramped confines of his study, Hitler paced back and forth, his left hand trembling uncontrollably, a symptom of the Parkinson's disease that had progressively worsened in recent months. As Junge's typewriter clacked in the background, Hitler dictated a document that was remarkable not for any admission of guilt, but for its continued hatred and delusion. "I have not sought war," Hitler dictated, despite having launched the conflict that had killed millions. It was desired and instigated exclusively by those international statesmen who were either of Jewish descent or worked for Jewish interests. Even as his Reich crumbled around him, Hitler's anti-Semitism remained undiminished. His final political statement ended with a call for merciless resistance against the universal poisoner of all peoples, international Jewry. These weren't just the ravings of a defeated man. They were the final expression of the ideology that had driven Europe to catastrophe. In his personal will, Hitler was more practical. He left his art collection to a gallery in my hometown of Linz on the Danube. Personal items of sentimental value were bequeathed to relatives and faithful co-workers, including his secretaries and housekeeper. Everything else of value was to go to the Nazi Party, though by this point, that party was days away from extinction. The documents were witnessed by Goebbels, Bormann, and 2 military officers, General Wilhelm Burgdorf and General Hans Krebs. All 4 would be dead within days. As Junge finished typing the documents at around 4 a.m., Hitler signed them with a trembling hand. His final written words were now complete, a mixture of hatred, self-justification, and practical arrangements for a world he would no longer inhabit. The Betrayals. As dawn broke on April 30th, Hitler received devastating news that confirmed his paranoid worldview. His trusted lieutenants had betrayed him one by one. Just days earlier, Hitler had learned that Hermann Göring, his designated successor and head of the Luftwaffe, had sent a telegram asking permission to take control of the Reich, suggesting Hitler was no longer able to lead. Enraged, Hitler had ordered Göring's arrest for high treason and stripped him of all titles. Even more shocking was the news that Heinrich Himmler, the feared head of the SS and architect of the Holocaust, had been negotiating surrender terms with the Western Allies through a Swedish diplomat. When Hitler received this information via a BBC broadcast, witnesses described him as trembling with rage, his face turning purple as he screamed about betrayal. In Hitler's eyes, wrote historian Ian Kershaw, Himmler's treachery was the worst of all. Hitler immediately ordered Himmler's arrest and had his SS representative in the bunker, Hermann Fegelein, who was also Eva Braun's brother-in-law, executed for desertion. These betrayals confirmed Hitler's growing paranoia that everyone had turned against him. In his increasingly delusional state, he saw these actions not as rational responses to Germany's inevitable defeat, but as personal betrayals by men he had trusted. The morning of April 30th brought one final piece of news that sealed Hitler's determination to die. Reports reached the bunker that Benito Mussolini, his fascist ally, had been captured and executed by Italian partisans. Mussolini's body, along with that of his mistress, Clara Petacci, had been hung upside down in a public square in Milan, where crowds spat upon and mutilated the corpses. For Hitler, this was the final confirmation of what awaited him if captured. He turned to his valet, Heinz Linge, and said, "I will not fall into the hands of an enemy who requires a new spectacle to divert their hysterical masses." The walls were closing in. Betrayed by his lieutenants, and with the example of Mussolini's humiliating end fresh in his mind, Hitler finalized his plans for death. Blondie the dog. As noon approached on April 30th, Hitler turned his attention to a matter that, strangely, seemed to cause him more genuine emotion than the millions of human deaths he had orchestrated: the fate of his beloved German shepherd, Blondie. Hitler had acquired Blondie in 1941 and was unusually attached to the dog. Witnesses in the bunker noted that he would often speak to Blondie in a gentle voice reserved for no human, not even Eva. He would let the dog sleep in his bedroom and personally supervised her feeding and care. Now, faced with his own imminent death, Hitler could not bear the thought of Blondie falling into Soviet hands. He summoned his physician, Dr. Werner Haas, and ordered him to test the effectiveness of the cyanide capsules that Heinrich Himmler had provided. The test subject would be Blondie. In a small bathroom in the bunker, Haas crushed a cyanide capsule in the dog's mouth using pliers. Blondie died instantly, confirming the potency of the poison. Hitler watched impassively, but those present noted that this was perhaps the only moment in those final days when genuine emotion crossed his face. After Blondie's death, Hitler ordered that her puppies also be killed. His dog handler, Fritz Tornau, took the puppies to the garden above the bunker and shot each one. Even Eva Braun's Scottish Terrier, Negus, was not spared. This cold-blooded killing of innocent animals revealed the true nature of Hitler's character. His concern was not for the suffering of others, but for control. Control over the manner and timing of death, even for those creatures most loyal to him. As news of Blondie's death spread through the bunker, many realized that Hitler's own end was imminent. If he was willing to kill the dog he loved, his own suicide could not be far behind. The psychological impact was profound, a final confirmation that no escape was possible. The final hours. By early afternoon on April 30th, the atmosphere in the bunker had become increasingly surreal. Soviet forces were now just a few hundred meters away, close enough that the sound of individual rifle shots could be heard above the constant artillery barrage. At approximately 1 p.m., Hitler had his final meal, a simple vegetarian dish prepared by his cook, Constanz Manziarli. He ate mechanically, saying little. Those present noted his vacant expression and the constant tremor in his left hand. After lunch, Hitler and Eva said their goodbyes to the bunker staff, including secretaries, military officers, and the household staff. Eva gave her expensive fur coat to Hitler's secretary, Trudel Junge, saying, "I always liked well-dressed women." Hitler shook hands silently with each person, his eyes unfocused. Around 2:30 p.m., Hitler and Eva retired to his personal study. Hitler instructed his SS adjutant, Otto Gunshot, to stand guard outside the door and ensure they would not be disturbed. He also gave specific instructions about the disposal of their bodies. They were to be wrapped in blankets, carried to the garden, doused with petrol, and burned. Inside the study, Hitler and Eva sat side by side on a small sofa. According to later testimony from those who found their bodies, Eva bit into a cyanide capsule. Hitler, apparently distrusting the poison alone, placed a 7.65 millimeter Walther PPK pistol against his right temple and pulled the trigger while simultaneously biting into a cyanide capsule of his own. At approximately 3:30 p.m., Gunshot heard a gunshot from within the study. After waiting a few moments, he entered along with Hitler's valet, Heinz Linge. They found Hitler slumped on the sofa, blood flowing from a bullet hole in his right temple. forming a pool on the carpet. Eva sat beside him, her body contorted from the effects of cyanide poisoning, but showing no visible wounds. The smell of bitter almonds, a characteristic of cyanide, filled the room, along with the acrid scent of gunpowder. Linga wrapped Hitler's body in a blanket, carefully folding it so that only the blood-soaked portion of his head remained visible. Gunshot carried Eva's body. Together with several SS officers, they carried the bodies up the bunker stairs and into the Chancellery garden, where a shell crater served as a makeshift grave. Despite ongoing Soviet shelling, the bodies were placed in the crater, doused with approximately 200 liters of gasoline, and set alight. The funeral party gave a final Nazi salute before retreating to the safety of the bunker as the flames consumed what remained of the Third Reich's leader. The final collapse. The flames that consumed Hitler's body on April 30th, 1945, marked not just the end of a man, but the final collapse of the regime he had built. Within hours, Soviet forces would capture the Reich Chancellery. Within days, Germany would surrender unconditionally. Hitler's final 24 hours reveal much about the man himself. To the very end, he remained consumed by hatred, paranoia, and a desperate need for control. He showed more emotion over his dog's death than the millions who had perished in the war he started. His final written words were not of remorse, but of continued hatred and self-justification. Perhaps most telling was his choice to die by suicide rather than face justice for his crimes. Unlike the soldiers he had ordered to fight to the last man, Hitler chose escape when confronted with defeat. His final act was one of cowardice, disguised as resolve. The bunker where Hitler spent his final days was later filled in and built over. Today, an unmarked parking lot covers the site, a deliberately mundane memorial to prevent it from becoming a shrine to Nazi sympathizers. This ordinary space stands in stark contrast to the grandiose thousand-year Reich that Hitler had envisioned. What should we make of these final hours? They remind us that even the most powerful dictators ultimately face a reckoning. They show us that ideologies built on hatred eventually collapse under their own weight, and they warn us about the dangers of following leaders who demand absolute loyalty while showing none in return. Hitler's last day on Earth ended not with the glory he had promised his followers, but in a concrete bunker with a self-inflicted gunshot wound and flames consuming his corpse. It was an inglorious end to one of history's most destructive lives. What other historical figures' final hours would you like us to explore? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this deep dive into history valuable, subscribe to our channel for more examinations of history's darkest and most consequential moments.